When German soldiers marched across Europe during the early years of the Second World War, they believed they were fighting for the most powerful nation on the continent. They had grown up hearing constant propaganda about German efficiency, German discipline, and German superiority. Yet many of these same soldiers would later find themselves thousands of miles from home, held inside American prisoner-of-war camps that operated with a philosophy completely different from what they expected. And what shocked them most was not the barbed wire fences, the guard towers, or the constant uncertainty of war. What truly stunned them were the small, everyday things, mundane details of American life that revealed a world completely unlike anything they had imagined. For many German POWs, the most unbelievable discovery was that even prisoners in the United States had access to foods and comforts that ordinary civilians in Germany could no longer dream of. Ice cream, Coca-Cola, fresh bread, abundant meat, hot showers, medical care, and recreational activities were basic parts of daily life. And these simple details changed the way many prisoners viewed America forever. For German POWs, the journey to the United States began with surrender in North Africa, Italy, or Western Europe. Once captured, many expected brutal treatment because that was what they had been taught to expect from the Allies. German training manuals warned soldiers that Americans were cruel, undisciplined, and violent. Nazi propaganda repeated that American society was collapsing into chaos, that American workers were lazy, that American factories could not keep up with German technology, and that the United States would never sustain a long war. German soldiers also believed that the American home front was weak and divided, and that ordinary Americans were suffering badly from shortages and rationing. To them, the idea that the United States had enough resources to feed prisoners well, let alone offer them luxuries, seemed impossible. The first shock came even before they arrived. German POWs traveled across the Atlantic on large American transport ships, many of which were the same vessels carrying U.S. troops to the front. On board, the prisoners expected to be mistreated or starved. Instead, they were given 3 hot meals a day, medical checks, and in some cases, even access to the ship's chaplain. Many POWs later said they had never eaten so much meat, vegetables, and fruit at one time. They watched American soldiers eating openly, laughing with each other, smoking, and enjoying foods that German civilians had not seen in years. The contrast was overwhelming. One prisoner later wrote that during the entire voyage to America, he had eaten more calories than he had in the previous 2 months combined. When the ships finally reached ports like New York, Boston, or Norfolk, another surprise awaited them. Crowds of American civilians gathered along the docks, not to cheer or mock them, but simply to watch with curiosity. Many German POWs expected hostility. Instead, they saw families waving, children pointing, and workers going about their business as if enemy soldiers walking through the port were nothing extraordinary. The sight of America itself, the skyscrapers, the cars, the wide streets, felt like stepping onto another planet. Even during wartime, the country seemed bursting with energy, full of new construction and industrial expansion. Once processed, the POWs were sent to camps spread across the United States. There were nearly 700 camps in total, from the deserts of Arizona to the forests of Michigan and the plains of Texas. Most of these camps were built quickly using standard military blueprints, but the conditions inside were surprisingly humane. German prisoners slept in heated barracks, had clean mattresses, received regular medical checkups, and were given clothing suitable for American weather. The Geneva Convention required that POWs receive the same standard of rations as the detaining power's own soldiers. For German prisoners, this rule resulted in one of the most shocking realizations of the war. The average American soldier ate better than the most privileged German civilian. Many German POWs were stunned to find milk served daily, fresh eggs, large cuts of beef, chicken, potatoes, butter, vegetables, and fruit. Even more astonishing was the availability of sugar. In Germany, Sugar had become a rare luxury by 1943, but in American camps, it was a standard part of meals. Some prisoners even traded sugar packets among themselves like currency. And then came the moment almost every former POW remembers vividly, the first time they were served ice cream. For German soldiers who had lived through years of rationing, bombing, and scarcity, ice cream symbolized something greater than food. It represented abundance, normalcy, and a society untouched by the destruction consuming Europe. Many POWs later said they could not believe that a country could produce enough food to give ice cream to prisoners. They assumed it must be a mistake or a special occasion, but it wasn't. Ice cream was served regularly in many camps, sometimes weekly, sometimes even daily in the hotter states. American guards joked about it, saying, only in America would prisoners gain weight during wartime. And then there was Coca-Cola. Most Germans had heard of the drink before the war, but few had ever tasted it. In America, Coca-Cola was everywhere. American guards drank it constantly, trucks delivered it to nearby towns, and advertisements appeared in newspapers and magazines. The Coca-Cola company even operated bottling plants inside some military bases. For POWs, the idea that a fizzy soft drink could be produced in such vast quantities that even enemy soldiers might taste it was unbelievable. In several camps, prisoners working on farms were paid small wages, and many immediately used their earnings to purchase Coca-Cola from local shops. Some German POWs wrote home, describing the drink as something from another world, sweet, refreshing, and unlike anything available in Germany since the war began. These experiences were so unusual that they created cultural confusion. How could an enemy nation treat its prisoners so well? How could a country at war afford such abundance? And why were the Americans not afraid to be kind? As time went on, the German prisoners realized that American treatment of POWs was not just generosity, it was strategy. By treating prisoners well, the U.S. hoped to encourage German soldiers to surrender and discourage them from fighting to the last man. The policy worked. Thousands of Germans preferred surrendering to Americans rather than facing the Soviets, where conditions were far harsher. Life inside the camps included more than food. German prisoners had access to libraries, sports fields, orchestras, and even educational programs. They could take classes in math, languages, engineering, and the sciences. Some learned English. Others discovered American hobbies like baseball, wood carving, or painting. Many were allowed to work on nearby farms, where American families often treated them with courtesy, or even friendship. Farmers were shocked at how polite and hard-working the prisoners were, and the POWs were stunned at how casually the Americans lived. They saw modern tractors, well-stocked barns, electric appliances, and cars everywhere. To them, it felt like a glimpse into the future, but the most touching interactions came from American children. Many kids living near the camps had never seen Europeans or enemy soldiers before. They waved at the prisoners, asked them questions, or offered small gifts like apples or chewing gum. For German POWs, these innocent moments were unforgettable. One prisoner later wrote, "The children were the first to show us that America did not hate us." Another said, "A child shared his candy with me. At home, no child had candy anymore." These small encounters broke down the propaganda they had been raised on. While these experiences shocked the German soldiers, they also changed them. Many POWs later admitted that they began questioning the Nazi worldview for the first time. They realized that the picture of America, painted by Nazi propaganda, lazy, chaotic, violent, was completely false. Instead, they saw a society built on individual freedom, hard work, and incredible industrial power. The United States had mass production capabilities unlike anything in Europe. Factories ran day and night, turning out planes, tanks, ships, weapons, and consumer goods in unimaginable quantities. To German POWs, it seemed as if America possessed endless resources. The longer the prisoners stayed, the more they understood the depth of America's industrial might. They saw trains pulling endless lines of freight cars, trucks carrying mountains of supplies, and factories producing goods with a speed and efficiency that dwarfed anything in Germany. Yet despite the power of the United States, some guards even apologized for small inconveniences, something a German soldier would never have experienced in his own army. One POW recalled a guard saying, "Sorry, boys, dinner's running a bit late today," and the prisoners looked at each other in disbelief. In Germany, no one apologized to soldiers, let alone to prisoners. As months turned into years, many German POWs gained significant amounts of weight. Men who had arrived thin and exhausted became healthier and stronger. Photographs from the camps show smiling prisoners playing soccer, eating meals outdoors, or working in the fields. Some even put on more than 50 pounds, which later shocked their families when they returned home. Letters written by POWs describe their astonishment at the quality and quantity of the food. "We eat like kings," one wrote. Another said, "If this is captivity, I fear the future at home." But the most powerful transformation occurred internally. For the first time, many German soldiers saw a society where people from different backgrounds lived together. They saw racial diversity, religious freedom, political debate, and economic opportunity. They saw women working in factories, driving trucks, and managing businesses. They noticed that people could criticize the government without fear. These experiences slowly reshaped their understanding of the world. The memory of tasting ice cream, drinking Coca-Cola, and living with unexpected comfort stayed with them long after the war ended. For many POWs, these simple moments became symbols of a different kind of society, one built not on fear, unity through propaganda or military conquest, but on abundance, innovation, and personal freedom. When they returned to Germany, many carried these impressions with them for the rest of their lives. The German POWs gradually settled into the strange normalcy of American prison camp life, and the longer they stayed, the more the contrast grew between what they had been told about America and what they were actually witnessing day after day. Many began to realize that the propaganda they had consumed for years, propaganda describing America as a collapsing, greedy, morally corrupt society, had been nothing more than a powerful illusion designed to keep them loyal to the Reich. Now they were living inside the truth, and the truth tasted a lot like Coca-Cola and vanilla ice cream. As the months passed, American guards noticed something else about the German prisoners. Their discipline, their routines, and even their moods began to change. At first, they were tense, stiff, and distant, still carrying the psychological weight of the battlefield. But over time, many of them softened, relaxing into the rhythm of a life where no one beat them, no one starved them, and no one screamed orders every hour of the day. Some guards even joked that the Germans acted more like off-duty soldiers on a long holiday than like prisoners of war. Yet beneath the calm surface, something deeper was happening in the minds of the POWs, something harder to measure but easy to sense. A slow, reluctant admiration for the American way of life. It wasn't simply about food or comfort. It was about fairness, organization, and opportunity. Many German POWs quietly observed the American guards, noticing their casual confidence, their friendly humor, their lack of fear toward authority, and their unshakable belief in their own system. To the German prisoners, raised in a society built on rigid hierarchy, strict obedience, and fear, this was profoundly disorienting. One POW later wrote that the American guards did not behave like masters. They behaved like equals wearing a uniform. Another recalled how shocked he was to watch enlisted men speak to officers almost casually, something that would have been unthinkable in the rigidly stratified Wehrmacht. But perhaps the most eye-opening aspect of all was how the Americans treated prisoners compared to how Germany treated captured soldiers. Many German soldiers had heard stories, true stories about how Soviet camps were places of death, starvation, and unbelievable suffering. The Nazis themselves also ran brutal camps for prisoners, especially those from the East. In contrast, the Americans offered shelter, clothing, libraries, sports, education, decent food, and almost unimaginable luxuries like chocolate, coffee, cigarettes, and Coca-Cola. It challenged everything the POWs thought they knew, not just about America, but about war itself. As the war dragged on, American camps continued to expand their educational programs for prisoners. The goal was clear: help them prepare for a peaceful life after the war and expose them to democratic values. The Germans could attend classes in literature, philosophy, mathematics, and even political science. Some prisoners studied English so well that guards joked about hiring them as interpreters. Lectures were given on democracy, the Constitution, and the structure of the American government. These classes were not forced. Prisoners attended because they were curious, and many wanted a distraction from the monotony of camp life. But what they learned left a permanent mark on their thinking. They realized that American society was not chaotic or weak, as Nazi propaganda insisted. It was stable, prosperous, and deeply committed to individual freedoms. Some German officers grew uneasy. They recognized that too many of their men were becoming, in their view, infected with the American spirit. They worried that admiration might replace loyalty. But there was little they could do. The camps were too large, and the influence was too strong. Even the most hardline Nazi prisoners found themselves drawn to the security and fairness of daily life. By late 1944 and early 1945, a bizarre transformation had taken place. Many German soldiers openly stated that they hoped not to be exchanged or released until the war ended, because staying in American hands was far safer than returning to the collapsing Reich. Word spread among new arrivals, too. If you're captured, some whispered, pray the Americans get you, not the Soviets. And then came the most surreal moment of all, when German POWs began working inside American towns under controlled labor programs. They harvested crops, repaired roads, worked in lumber mills, and assisted in various civilian tasks. Every day, American families saw them driving trucks, carrying tools, or eating lunch under a shade tree while laughing with guards. Many civilians were at first suspicious, but soon curiosity replaced fear. Townspeople were astonished by how polite, disciplined, and hard-working the Germans were. Locals even brought pies, sandwiches, and cold drinks for them, acts of hospitality that shocked the prisoners. One German POW recalled the first time a young American woman handed him a bottle of Coca-Cola on a hot day. He had never tasted such a drink in his life. He wrote that the moment felt surreal, as if the enemy had suddenly become a neighbor. Another remembered an elderly American farmer offering him a slice of homemade apple pie, telling him, "Son, you're far from home. You might as well get a taste of ours." To the prisoners, these acts weren't just kindness. They were proof that the enemy they had been taught to fear was, in fact, profoundly human. The exposure to civilian life also offered them a first-hand view of America's economic power. They saw farms with machinery more advanced than what most Germans had ever seen. They saw supermarkets filled with canned goods, fruit, meat, and dairy, food that ordinary families could buy every week. In Germany, such abundance hadn't existed even before the war, let alone during its final years. It became impossible to ignore the sheer industrial strength that America had unleashed in the conflict. Many POWs later admitted that the war felt unwinnable the moment they saw the scale of American agriculture and industry. If they can feed their civilians this well, one prisoner wrote, what must their factories be producing? Another noted that the American South alone seemed capable of feeding the entire German army. Meanwhile, inside the camps, entertainment programs continued to grow. Prisoners formed their own orchestras, performed plays, and even created humorous newspapers. American officers were bewildered by how creative and lively the Germans were once they no longer lived under constant fear. It became a running joke that some camps looked more like university campuses than prison facilities. Yet the irony was impossible to ignore. The Germans, trained to fight against democracy, were now learning to live within it. Some embraced it, others resisted, but no one could escape the influence. Even the guards noticed the transformation. They saw German soldiers who had once marched stiffly now walking casually with their hands in their pockets. They heard prisoners whistling American tunes, cracking jokes, and discussing American baseball games. More than once, guards caught German POWs attempting to build makeshift ice cream machines out of scrap metal, claiming that no camp activity lifted morale more than the promise of a cold dessert. One American lieutenant recalled watching in disbelief as a group of German prisoners organized their own Coca-Cola Appreciation Society. He laughed that they were more enthusiastic about the drink than most Americans. But behind the humor lay a serious reality. These men were changing. Their worldview, their assumptions, their loyalties, everything was quietly shifting. And by the time Germany surrendered in May 1945, millions of German soldiers were scattered across Allied prison camps around the world. But those held by the United States had a unique experience, one that taught them not humiliation, but humanity. When the war finally ended, the POWs faced a new challenge: returning home. Many dreaded the thought. Their homeland was shattered. Cities in ruins, families displaced, factories destroyed, and food scarce. They had lived for years in clean camps with stable meals, organized routines, and relative safety. Going back to the chaos of post-war Germany felt like stepping into darkness. As they prepared for repatriation, many prisoners wrote heartfelt letters to the American guards, thanking them for their fairness and respect. Some asked for addresses so they could stay in contact. A few even returned years later as immigrants, seeking the very life they had tasted behind barbed wire. Countless memoirs written after the war reveal the same truth. For many German POWs, their time in American camps had been the most humane chapter of an otherwise brutal war. They never forgot the taste of ice cream, the fizz of a Coca-Cola bottle, or the simple kindness of strangers. They had entered the camps as enemies, but left with a complicated respect for the nation that had defeated them. For some, it was the moment they realized the war had always been lost. Not because Germany lacked courage, but because America possessed something far more powerful than weapons: abundance, freedom, and a way of life that could not be crushed. And so, decades later, those former POWs spoke openly about their experiences. When asked what surprised them the most about America, they almost always gave the same answer. Not the guards, not the camps, not the rules, but the ice cream and the Coca-Cola. Because in the middle of a world war, those two simple comforts said more about American strength than any battleship or bomber ever could.